All right, Hafide Guam, welcome back to the Guam Show. I'm here at the National Weather Service office, and I'm joined by the Aydlett twins, Landon and Brandon Aydlett, from obviously right here, the National Weather Service. How you guys doing today?
Very well. We are enjoying the sunnier weather we've had, at least for a couple days now.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's like a typhoon rolls through, and is it the next day or the day after? I'm already sweating. It's so hot. You'd expect it to be a little bit more rainy or anything like that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, sometimes that happens like that. You have the calm before the storm, and then you also have the calm immediately after the storm. And we've had a little bit of a mix of the calm, but then also more tumultuous weather with flash flooding going on earlier this week. So it's kind of been a mix of all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. For the record, we are recording this on the Friday after the typhoon has passed. So, let's just jump right into it. Actually, no, let's not do that. Let's go ahead and let's give a little background here. Will give us a little brief history of typhoons on Guam / in the Marianas, and bring us up to where we are today or last week.
Yeah, we've definitely had a long and storied career of tropical cyclones passing through the islands. And before I get into that, tropical cyclones, it's just an all-encompassing term that includes tropical depressions, tropical storms, typhoons, and super typhoons. But we've had a long history, especially since World War II, with a number of typhoons, with most recently Typhoon Mawar in September of 2018, and then also Typhoon Dolphin, that was May of 2015 in a strong El Nino year. So a lot of times we get these typhoons in April, May, and February of the year, and people think this is out of season. It doesn't happen. And it does happen. We do have a climatology that shows tropical cyclones. They can and do happen around the year here on Guam and in the western North Pacific region. But where does our recent Typhoon Mawar, where does that stand up to other storms? And Brandon and I, we've been here for 13 years, and this was the strongest typhoon we've experienced here in the Guam office, surpassing Mawar and also Dolphin. But it goes all the way back to 2002 Typhoon Mawar. That was December 2002, which struck Guam as a 150 sustained mile per hour typhoon. And then, of course, you go back through the previous decades where you have other powerhouse storms like Typhoon Pamela in May of 1976, Typhoon Paka in December of 1997, and then also Typhoon Karen, November of 1962. And that was historically the strongest one to strike Guam.
So, Karen was stronger than everything else you just mentioned?
Correct.
Oh.
That's the strongest one on record, and that was packing winds up to 165 mile per hour sustained.
Whoa. And what was the sustained on Mawar? Mawar?
Yeah,
how do you pronounce it first?
Mawar.
Mawar?
It's a Mawar that comes from Malaysia, that was contributed by the nation of Malaysia to the Typhoon Committee, and that translates to rose. So I don't remember seeing too many roses last week. It was probably more like a lot of thorns. And those thorns are still sticking in people's sides. But in hindsight, we were very fortunate with Mawar. It became a super typhoon with max winds of 155 miles per hour sustained. Prior to striking Guam, it went through a little regeneration process with its eye that caused it to lose a little bit of intensity, as well as some drier air was moving through. It weakened it to a mere 140 mile per hour sustained typhoon, which is still a powerhouse category 4. But shortly after it passed over Guam, it started getting its act together. It became a major category 5 super typhoon with 185 mile per hour sustained winds. I don't know how we would have fared if that thing didn't briefly lose its intensification trend. We were very fortunate.
Well, additionally, with that intensification to the west of Guam, it became more symmetric with all these torrential rains also on the north side of the system. As it passed through the Marianas, Rota, Tinian, Saipan did not get much rain. Just more of a Category 1 typhoon, tropical storm conditions. But had Mawar been the shape that it was to the west of us 24 hours later, had it been that coming through the Marianas, all of our islands would have had some significant impacts. It would have been amazing, just devastating.
So we got a question I put out asking for questions for people I might have for you guys. And Romina King, who was literally just in this room, kind of kicked her out. Sorry, Dr. King. Said to ask you guys to talk about the eye wall reconstruction. And you mentioned that really briefly, but I didn't know eye walls have a construction or could have a reconstruction. So just can you give us like eye wall 101?
Yeah, so it's in the meteorological community, we see these. We know them more colloquially as ERCs, eye wall replacement cycles. And so typically, most people recognize typhoons or hurricanes in the rest of the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. Well-formed tropical cyclones have that center eye. But once you go below those cloud tops, you're looking at the radar imagery, you're looking at some of the other specialized satellite imagery, you start seeing these rings of really, really heavy showers and thunderstorms. And so we know them as concentric circles, concentric eye walls. And so the eye wall is where there's really devastating torrential rains and strong winds are. But sometimes there's a little moat of drier air between those rings. And what eventually happens is the innermost eye will kind of contract, it'll weaken, gradually dissipate, and then the larger outer eye wall will eventually start to contract. And then that will become the new dominant eye. So during this ERC, during this eye wall replacement cycle, the intensification stops, or sometimes the storm even weakens overall. So that's what we saw with Mawar, going from a Category 5 southeast of Guam to a Category 4 as it was passing over us. And then it took a good 12 to 18 hour period for the inner eye to gradually clear itself out. And so the center eye, this eye of a typhoon, becomes cloudless. It becomes clear because of sinking air. That air is warming, it's drying out, and then you have no clouds. The whole time Mawar was passing Guam, that was not the case. It was just cloud-filled. It was just really jumbled. You could not see it through the satellite imagery. Really had to use radar imagery to see definitively where the center of the storm was until the radar went out. But then the next day, Friday, after it passed to the west of Guam, then that eye cleared up. The center eye became the dominant feature, and then the storm just took off. It intensified very quickly into a powerful Category 5 system, 185 max winds, and that's what we were fortunate to miss. It would have been a heck of a lot worse for Guam, for Rota, even for Tinian Saipan had it came through the islands with that intensity.
So is that a normal thing? Is that for typhoons to have eye wall replacement? Was that the word?
Yep, it's quite typical with the stronger tropical cyclones. There's been a lot of research done with looking at a lot of the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico hurricanes. The National Hurricane Center, they do benefit from aircraft reconnaissance, where they're flying airplanes right straight through these hurricanes.
Whoa.
And so they're doing studies on all the winds, the thermodynamics, the temperature, humidity, looking at the winds all throughout the hurricane. They're dropping things called drop sondes. So we have our radio sondes attached to weather balloons that we float up into the sky. They have drop sondes. They drop out of the airplane, taking all these same weather measurements. And so there's a lot of research on the eye wall replacement cycle. And so there was actually some research discussed among a lot of global tropical meteorologists about Typhoon Mawar and its eye wall replacement cycle.
Got another question here from Timmy Toy, and he says, what was the peak wind recorded? And maybe you can add the touch on that particular word, recorded.
Yes.
And at the same time, I got another question here from Russ Keller asking on the status of the weather radar. So maybe you can talk about your different instruments, the weather balloon, the satellites, the radar, things I'm probably no idea about.
Well, absolutely. And so we just put out our first issuance of the storm report, post-storm report, and that is available on our webpage at weather.gov/GUM. And you can just scroll all the way to the very bottom, and on the right, you'll see a little link that says past weather, tropical cyclone reports. And so there is a lot of information with the storm. But to get to that first question about the peak wind recorded, there is a big asterisk with recorded because during the peak of the storm, power outages, sensor failure, we did not really get any wind data recorded from the worst of the storm. But with that said, here at the office, we did record a sustained wind of about 79 knots which equates to about 90 miles per hour. We did get a peak wind, so that's your gust, was around 115 knots. And otherwise, with our observations that go out with the airport, we did reach up to about 105 miles per hour for the peak wind. So that's pretty powerful. I believe that would be equivalent to a Category 2. But again, that was while the typhoon was still intensifying as it was passing the north tip of Guam near Retidian. And we did get stronger winds in the ensuing hours after midnight. So unfortunately, we don't have a good sampling of the worst winds. But that's just the nature of a weather observation. Is sometimes the sensors will fail before you can record those data. But otherwise, looking at the damage, the stronger winds, of course, were in the north end of Guam, closer to the center, and then farther away from the center, the winds decreased. And but
by the center of the typhoon, you mean?
Yep.
Okay.
The center of the typhoon, the winds dramatically increase right toward the eye, and then they do decrease as you get farther away from the center.
So specifically for us, that was Dededo, Jigo, Anderson Air Force Base, Retidian, that had the strongest conditions. Once you go southern across Guam, central Guam, southern Guam, Maritzo, they still had heavy conditions, but they were not feeling the strongest winds that were felt across Dededo and Jigo.
Mm-hmm. And you also had a question about the radar. Landon, you got the latest information on that?
Yeah, we're still working several issues with the Air Force. And just as a reminder, the radar is not a Weather Service asset. It's a DoD asset, and so they own the radar. We do have the Anderson.
Is that what those golf balls are up when you're traveling, taking a boat up the northwest coast?
Well, that one's military.
There's like five or there's a handful
those
of them.
are separate from the weather.
Okay.
But the weather radar, that's over here in Barragata. So if you're going toward University of Guam, passing Wendy's and Untalan Middle School, and you see this golf ball thing up on a tower, that is the Doppler weather radar, and that's over toward Ladera Tower. So that is an Air Force owned and operated radar. We're the primary customer for it, or the user. But there were several issues. We lost communications with the radar prior to the storm making closest point of approach Wednesday evening, which was unfortunate because we were looking at a likelihood of a central Guam passage of the eye. But as we're watching this thing go up in the radar imagery, or we're tracking that center motion, we knew that it was going steadily to the right of what the forecast track was. And so we knew that the longer it kept going to the right of the forecast track, the farther north it would go. And so we knew it was going to be a northern Guam, maybe even a Rota Channel passage, and then we lost the radar. So that was unfortunate, but it started making its gradual turn toward the west-northwest just a little bit later than was forecast. And so we ended up having a northern Guam clip by the eye and the eye wall itself. But the radar, there's several problems. There may be some mechanical issues as well as some minimal damage from the storm itself. So the Air Force radar maintenance team is out there assessing things as well as looking at the power connections and the communications lines. So hopefully the radar will be up and running again before too much longer. We are approaching peak season for typhoons, and it's an El Nino year, so that's going to give us a lot more activity in the region. Doesn't mean we're going to take a direct hit again, but it does mean we have a much higher potential for tropical cyclones in our region.
Okay, maybe we'll come back to what the future looks like.
Yep.
But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that word recorded because I have a very vivid memories of Typhoon Paka, and a lot of us were like to say and believe, and it may or may not be true, that like Paka was the strongest ever, but it was so strong it broke the measuring devices, so we can't really say that for sure. I think we feel like that almost after most typhoons, but depending on how old you are.
And depending on who you're talking to, this was the worst one they ever experienced. And that could be for several reasons based on your location, which village you're in, for this storm versus other storms, but then also it was a long duration typhoon.
It hung around forever.
It hung around like COVID. It just did not want to leave. But it was moving so slowly through the region, and of course we kept kicking our time frame of a CPA from midday Wednesday to afternoon to
closest
evening.
Point of approach?
That's closest point of approach, and it's more of a technical term versus a impacts term, because you can have the strongest and worst conditions before CPA or after CPA, and those conditions they can linger for a long period of time. The CPA is just how close that center of the system is to you. So a lot of people put a lot of weight on CPA, but it's merely just a technical term.
Yeah, you keep in mind that the CPA for Mawar was probably a little bit, nearly the same distance from the center of Mawar to the south tip of Rota as it was from the center of Mawar to maybe Umatic. Not much difference, but the impacts were significantly different. All the heavy rains on the south side of Mawar versus much drier on the north side. And so even though the center point of approach was just one of these fleeting technicalities that the center is closest to you at this point, say around midnight, those impacts were from Thursday or Wednesday evening all the way into Thursday morning. So a good 12, 18-hour process of really damaging impacts.
Okay. So sticking with the instrumentation, another question from Timmy Toy. How high is the anemometer rated for? And I'm going to insert what is that? And then also, what is the highest ever recording of that type?
The anemometer is just a fancy word for wind sensor. Wind sensor is a lot easier to spell.
Okay.
But anemometer are those devices that measure wind speed and wind direction. There's several different types of anemometer. You've got the little propeller, looks like a little airplane with a propeller that spins around into the wind.
Literally what I was thinking about.
It pivots as it faces into the wind. There's your wind direction. But then you have the rooster one that sits on top of a farmhouse. Then you got the fancier one, the sonic anemometers. So they have like 3 little rods that stick out of the top of a cylinder, and so there's a little bit of an emission of sound, and then based on the wind, there's a Doppler shift. There's a raising or lowering of the pitch, and so with those 3 sensors measuring that change in pitch, now you can calculate the wind speed. So imagine if you're driving down the road, you see this police car with the sirens on. And as soon as it passes you, it goes in a lower pitch. That's the Doppler shift, and so that's how the sonic anemometers work on that same principle. Various sensors
is that quite precise, since it's relying on a more like kind of fundamental phenomenon instead of like mechanical? Or
you could probably. You could make the argument there is some wiggle room on the exactness, but you're at that point you're going to go into the fractions, into the small decimals, and to the grand scheme of things, it would have very little impact. But various sensors do have their various ratings, and so typically what we use is rated up to about 125 knots, and so that's pushing almost 150 miles per hour. Beyond 150 miles per hour, you're going to be hard pressed to find something that can survive and continue to accurately measure weather conditions.
Yeah, back to the sensor itself. We like to have several types of sensors out here so that we can cross-reference it, whether it's thermometers, anemometers, or also even rain gauges. We have automatic rain gauges and also the manual where we actually stick a measuring stick into a funnel, a tube, and we clock that rainfall. And so sometimes it's always accurate versus our automatic tipping bucket rain gauge.
Let me jump in on that one. So I actually have experience working with a tipping bucket like rain gauge, and so it's just a cylinder, and it has this thing that kind of pivots. So when it fills up enough, it pivots over, and then the other side of it can fill up and then pivot back. It's kind of like a 2-sided thing from that bamboo water thing from like Kill Bill, right? But the problem is if it's raining hard enough, it doesn't tip fast enough, and you're losing like a lot of accuracy.
You get a lot of slush, and we had some rainfall rates.
Yeah,
we were exceeding 7 inches per hour at some rain gauges.
That's more than some countries get in a year.
Yeah, and so when you're dealing with those rainfall rates, the tipping buckets, they'll miss a lot of it. And so we have to go to the manual. You go old style, put the stick in the tube, and that's the best.
Yeah. And like, so I like scientific rigor. I have a lot of I have as much appreciation as frustration for it because there's so much caveats we have to throw with everything,
Yep.
right? So when people talk about highest recorded this or that, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but like, it probably or very likely was higher, but we can only measure it. It's like, it's literally destructive force winds, right? So things are gonna break. So it's like, I could break a ruler into pieces, tape it back together, and have some idea. Or if I can't fix the ruler in time, it's not going to be accurate.
Yep.
Probably not the best analogy.
Well, the other
there.
thing is, what's the guarantee that one spot that you measured a certain wind speed, that was the maximum strongest wind that occurred anywhere on the island? You can't assume that.
So this anemometer. Did I say that?
Anemometer,
It's a
yep.
fun word. That's a fun anemometer. So are they all here, or is there just one here? Or
We have several. So we have one with our automated surface observing system, our ASOS, right on the tarmac. That's about a couple hundred yards from the weather office building. We've got another one in the backyard of our building, so we like to have that redundancy.
I thought you were going to say your house.
Well, no, we don't have one in the house.
You
yet.
might.
Nothing at the
days.
house. Some of the forecasters have some sensors. There's actually several private weather systems around Guam and even up in Saipan. And so we do find those on the internet, and then other entities that have weather sensors. We try to find every weather sensor there is. Keep an eye on it because they all tell a story. Now, we can't guarantee proper sighting. If somebody's got an anemometer against the side of a building, it's not going to be detecting your winds very accurately with a certain direction. So there are some
Or
proper
like wind tunneling too.
Exactly. And so that
So-
could lead to much stronger winds than is truly realistic. So those are things that we have to take into account for. The Weather Service, we do really stringently adhere to those sighting requirements. Same thing for rain gauges. There can't be any obstructions within a 30-degree slope of the top of the rain gauge. So trees, houses, buildings, whatever, it's got to be at least below a 30-degree slope.
What's that word? Sighting? Is that with a C or a S?
Sighting, S.
S. Okay.
Yes.
And what does that?
believe.
What does that mean in this context?
So look.
Site specifications.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
It's
So
up to standard.
if you look in our backyard, you're going to see there's a couple of rain gauges. There's nothing around them. So those have
That
been
accounts for,
properly
like,
sighted
wind.
to have no
So
obstructions.
no interference.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
So we talked about anemometers. We talked about the radar. So what else do you use? So let's do a real quick, knock this one out. Also from Timmy Toy, do you release weather balloons in all conditions? And his real question is, do you release weather balloons into typhoons?
We'd like to,
Yeah, it's asterisk. And
if the eye is overhead, sure.
yeah, we have to cancel the balloon launches if there's lightning anywhere around because it's an explosive hazard. Plus, it's dangerous to be outside in lightning in the first place. When thunder roars, get indoors, you're in danger. But at certain wind conditions, it becomes hazardous to even be outside as it was during the typhoon passage. But we do the balloons twice a day at 9 o'clock a.m. and p.m. And at that very hour, weather balloons are going up all across the region and across the United States. All that information goes into the forecast, numerical forecast
Wait,
models.
so everybody's releasing balloons at the same time around the world?
Yes, so that goes into the 0Z and the 12Z forecast model cycles. But if we have a tropical cyclone, and again, that's a depression, storm, or typhoon or super typhoon, within a certain amount of distance, like 300 nautical miles of a site, we release those balloons 4 times a day because forecast models are run every 6 hours. And so we want that more data. We need more observations to provide that snapshot, that glimpse of what's happening in the atmosphere to go into the forecast models. And so the more data we have, the better the model can forecast, at least we hope. And so we were launching balloons up until it became too dangerous to be outside. If we were to have
Time and date, when?
yeah, yeah. If we were to have the eye pass over the office, we were going to release a balloon no matter what time it was, just to put a balloon up in the eye of the storm and collect that information.
That data would have been golden for
Yeah.
researchers, modelers, just to see the inside of a typhoon and or a tropical cyclone in general. So I guess the last one that we launched was 3 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, around 3 p.m. And so the explosive hazard that does exist with weather balloons, we fill those with hydrogen. So hydrogen is just extremely volatile.
Hindenburg, right? Is that what it was called? Hindenburg?
Hindenburg.
Yes. So the concern is if you're carrying this massive balloon out. Well, you're not really carrying it. You're just
I
guiding
released it this
out.
morning, so if you're listening to this, go to my Instagram. You get to watch me release one of these balloons. Turn
so-
your cell phone off because just in case.
In case there's any hydrogen leaks, you can't see it, can't smell it. You just you see the bad consequences. If that balloon is just whipping around, and so it's a latex type of balloon, and so it'll deform in those winds, and it's just yanking all over. If it rubs up against your hair, you get a little bit of static electricity, or it hits another structure, the jagged edge of something.
Would it be a bad idea to try that on purpose, like to rub it on my hair?
Well, that's why we have short hair. That's for the weather balloon safety.
I'm just thinking of the picture of that, like, just my hair like sticking to the balloon from
I
static.
don't know if a weather balloon, if the material would actually make your hair stand up like a typical like a birthday balloon. I'm not sure.
We'll try that.
Okay.
Maybe we can
I'll come
test
back.
it with it not being hydrogen.
Well, we can always go to helium.
Use helium or just a manual inflation, but that would take a long time. Trust me. Done it before.
Sorry, I cut you off.
But so just out of that main concern for static electricity, if there is a leak in the balloon, you do not want to give any opportunity for some type of sparking action to set it off. It's happened before. I don't know if within the Weather Service or another country, but there have been incidents, and there are some major consequences.
Literally, is it explosive or just flammable?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. They are twins.
I would have to read up on the internet to see how hydrogen combusts, and especially what it would look like, what it would sound like, and how quick it is. But I imagine that would be a good, interesting read.
And we're literally like you share a fence with the airport, so really not a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
We like to be careful, and of course, with every balloon launch, we will give the air traffic control tower a call. Say, hey,
I was there.
anybody? Yeah, just in case.
All right, off at Guam. This is a weather balloon. Let it go. All right. Oh, that's so funny. Weather balloons are filled with hydrogen gas, which is actually flammable, so you have to be careful to prevent explosions. The gas is produced with this machine by getting hydrogen from water via a process called electrolysis, and is then stored to later fill balloons. This thing is tied to a long string so the balloon can take it up and into the sky. It measures wind direction and speed, air pressure, temperature, relative humidity, and so on to help create forecasts. Satellites and radars are awesome tools, and weather balloons are awesome too because they actually move through the air to record their measurements. For example, pilots could be warned if ice could start to form on their wings at a certain altitude. This particular balloon ascended to 117,000 feet before it expanded to maybe 30 feet and exploded. And they do this twice a day, every day, around the world at the same time. Cool. So there's some images on the wall behind us. I think some of them that are quite white and cloudy, that's obviously satellite imagery. The ones that have color, those are all radar.
Yeah, so on the far bottom two left, those are weather radar. The first one, that's the reflectivity. That's where you're seeing the really heavy showers, torrential rains of Typhoon Mawar. And then the next one to it, that is velocity. So we're looking at the motion of the water particles, looking at the particles coming toward the radar and moving away from the radar. And that was really useful with the Typhoon Mawar. We were able to see where the strongest winds were. And we were watching that very closely until the radar went down. But it gives you that clue, how far do those really strong winds extend from the eye of Mawar. Same thing for the bottom two on the far right. Also, velocity on the left, and then reflectivity, where's the heavier rains. And then the rest of them on the top and the center, those are satellite images all throughout the years. And I guess we just need to find another frame like these, and we'll find some really impressive radar and satellite imagery for Typhoon Mawar, and that will go up on this wall as a direct hit in the Marianas.
And so all these colors are, you said they're showing velocity, they're showing wind speed, not rainfall.
The far left is reflectivity, but that is closely related to rainfall intensity. So we will actually, in a tropical cyclone, you see colors like yellow, orange, red, it's a foregone conclusion. There's going to be some flooding, major flooding concerns. On a normal day-to-day weather, we're looking at that, but we're also looking at another derivative of that that's kind of taking the reflectivity to look at the intensity, and then it's creating, it's calculating rainfall rate. So 1 inch per hour, 2 inches per hour, and then based off of that, or even quantified over 30-minute duration, how much rain has fallen, radar estimates. We'll use that as a basis for flash flood advisories and warnings, as we did several days ago, and as we could see ourselves doing later on this weekend.
Yeah, a lot of times people focus on the rainfall amounts, not so much the rainfall rates. And so when we're talking about rates, it's about how much rain falls in a period of time. So if you're looking at 4 inches of rain to fall in 24 hours, that'll be a wet day. Mm-hmm. Not bad, but a wet day. If you get 4 inches of rain in 1 hour, yeah, you'll probably have some flash flooding in urban flooding areas. If you get 4 inches in 20 or 30 minutes, watch out. There's going to be some significant flooding concerns. And so that's where we're really focused on with the wet season. We get these high-end rainfall rates. You get these tropical cyclones that can dump some torrential rainfall in a very short period of time. And when you have it extending for 3 or 4 hours, like we did on Wednesday last week, yeah, major flooding issues.
Okay. Just, I guess, another question from the audience here. Not that this is live. I put this out on like my group chats on my Instagram. So a question from Manyeka. What is El Nino and what does that mean for our community? Is this El Nino related? Can we say that yet? And then also while we're on that, while we're on there, can we draw a line to this with climate change, or can you with the typhoon, or can you just comment on those two things, El Nino and climate change in relation to this typhoon or typhoons in general?
And those are really popular questions we get asked all the time. Is every time we have a typhoon hit the island, especially if it's a big one, the first question people ask is this because of climate change? And so climate change is over a long period of time, and we have to remember we're in Typhoon Alley. Mm-hmm. Typhoons are a way of life out here. Mm-hmm. They happen. They've been happening.
Not in Koshra and Pohnpei, though.
Exactly. And so
they keep sending it all over to us.
And so if we're going to ask if each storm is a result of climate change, you also have to ask every year, if we don't get a storm, is that because of climate change also? And we've just come out of 3 very, very quiet years with no tropical cyclone activity in the Guam area. We had a tropical storm at Sani threaten Guam that was in October of 2020, and then it's been quiet since. We had Typhoon Malakas in Yap State. That was in April of 2022. And
I don't even remember that one.
Yeah, April 2021 was Typhoon Sergei in Palau and Yap. Otherwise, we've been very fortunately quiet across the Mariana Islands and across Micronesia, and that's been thanks to the 3-year La Nina climate pattern. And so that's where our ENSO cycle's been, and this is a very well-studied and understood pattern in the region.
Sorry, so ENSO is El Nino Southern Oscillation, yes?
Yes,
so
El Nino Southern Oscillation.
Within that, El Nino and La Nina. So which one is which? I can never remember which.
So La
most
Nina,
most of the textbooks and stuffs give it from an American perspective, and it's the opposite for us, right?
It's the opposite for us. So the bottom line that we tell people in the region is La Nina is relax. It's going to be a fairly easy year.
I like that.
But El Nino is watch out, hold on. It's going to be a busy year. And so
The boy child. Rambunctious.
Yeah.
And just going to cause issues.
There's going to be action. And so with La Nina, the tropical Central Pacific waters are cooler. And so a lot of the tropical cyclone activity shifts westward. So we start seeing tropical disturbances develop in central and western Micronesia near Palau, and then they materialize and become something more significant in the Philippine Sea and then strike the Philippines or Southeast Asia. But in the El Nino pattern, the tropical central west Pacific waters are much warmer. And so you see the convective actions, the thunderstorms, the showers, disturbances, they're developing farther eastward, like eastern Micronesia, the Marshall Islands near the dateline. And once they start developing there, they have a lot of time to really materialize, become something significant and nefarious for our region. So these El Nino years, think back to 2015, that was our last strong El Nino. We had a lot of weather in our region with
I remember
I
that.
think it was like 7 or 8 tropical cyclones passed between Guam and Saipan.
I was teaching scuba full time back in those days, and I had a lot of classes and stuff cancel.
Yeah.
Like
So-
multiple times too.
We're in that shift right now. The La Nina just very conclusively ended, and we shifted quickly to an ENSO neutral, which brings things to more of an average type year. But now we're looking at a very likely quick switch to El Nino, possibly becoming a strong El Nino in the coming months.
So, the way you said the word convective in there, and we'll come back to that. But just to close the loop on El Nino, La Nina, one of those means that wind pushes seawater east or west, so either toward us or away from us, and the water can get a little high, or the tides can get a little higher than the tide predicts, or a little than the tide predicts. Which one is which? I can never remember.
Yes, so La Nina, stronger trade winds. Easterly trades, you've got all the winds blowing from east to west. You're piling up the water in the far west Pacific, those warmer waters. And so that's when we start seeing those higher water levels in the West Pacific. Coincidentally, with those warm waters, that's where you get more convection, more showers, more thunderstorms developing. And then that results in eventual tropical depressions forming. It tends to be south and west of the Marianas. The opposite, El Nino, we start seeing westerly winds along the equator, pushes all that water back to the east, central and east Pacific. So water levels in the west drop significantly. Sometimes this 2-year process could result in about a 2-foot water level change for Palau and Yap. Just incredible, 2 feet.
Palau and Yap, but not us.
Not so much us, but we
Just
still
because we're just that much a little further away from
we're
the
not
equator.
right against the far west Pacific.
Oh, okay.
But we still see a substantial change. So the difference between an exposed reef at low tide versus shallow water at low tide. And so we're starting to see more exposed reef at low tide. Typically, we would see that with a full moon when the high tides are higher, low tides are lower. But now we'll start seeing more exposed reef at other low tides. And so it's an oceanic basin type of response. And so where that warm water goes is shifting farther east. There it goes the showers and thunderstorms and the eventual tropical depression development. And so out there to our southeast, now it kind of puts that the crosshairs right on the Marianas, and so that's where we get the Typhoon Alley from. Right now, coincidentally, Palau and Yap tend to stay a bit quieter, except for when a tropical cyclone like Mawar sits east of Yap, passes to the north, and then you get the southwest monsoon. Otherwise, they're pretty dry.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty small difference, like 2 feet. I've lived in places where I think over the year, between the lowest low tide and the highest high tide is like 15 feet or something.
Yeah.
So it changes the way you operate when I used to work in diving. But for us, like our reefs are like so shallow. Our reefs are one of the most shallowest reefs I've been on. And so, 6 inches can make a huge difference in terms of trying to get in and out of a reef or fishing. And like 2 feet is a gigantic difference because the other places I'm talking about, even that lowest low tide, you still might have 5 feet of depth to play with. But for us, if you have 2 feet less water than you're supposed to, that the reef has been already 1 foot or 6 inches out of the already in the air. So it's a significant thing I've had to deal with personally and professionally.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing is when those really low tides occur during the daytime, that water on the reef gets very warm. So it's not good for the coral, and then the susceptibility to coastal inundation. We saw a significant event in December 2021 in the Marshall Islands and across much of central Micronesia. Several different large swell events across the Pacific all converged on the Micronesian islands. And at high tide, around the full moon high tide, king tides as they're known out here, there was a lot of island flooding. One island in Pohnpei State was 75-80% overwashed with salt water. And so that's pretty significant for these low-lying islands. And so that threat is significantly reduced if the overall water level is much lower. And so you put this in a bigger context with the global warming and climate change. What kind of sea level rises are we talking about over 50 or 100 years versus what we're talking about 1 to 2 feet in a year-to-year So there's a lot of things at play, and so it's important for us as forecasters, meteorologists, and communicators to really factor all these players and to kind of help others understand what it means contextually.
Yeah, thanks for bringing back the climate change back up. But like, so I hear like the discourse, I hear the conversations like, oh, is this typhoon climate change? I'm like, I feel like it's a little too hard to connect some dots that directly.
Yeah.
But I think the very easy dot to connect is sea level rise, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's ice melting, glaciers, polar, ice caps, north and south, right? And then also just thermal expansion. So if you're younger and your teacher's making you watch this, if you heat up materials, a lot of them will expand, they'll get a little bit bigger, and that includes the oceans. And so you can have the ocean literally rising, sea level rise in a couple of different ways. Maybe there's another way I'm not even sure about. And that's one that's you can draw a very direct line to, I would say. Is that fair to say?
And that is very fair. And it's documented. It's observed. It's documented through multiple sources and means. And so we see these trends. I don't care so much as far as my capacity at the National Weather Service. I don't care so much the why. That can get very political. But the fact that it's happening, that's what I need to take and communicate to our stakeholders in the region, that when it comes to these rising levels, coupled with inundation events, large swell, storm surge occasions, tropical cyclones, every little increase in sea levels overall will make these flood events more significant and more frequent. And so that's what we take home and try to compel to people.
Okay. Cool. All right. So on the note of storm surge, I have a question from Professor Mike Orr. What was actual storm surge run up over parts of the islands? Wind speeds over parts of the island. I think last handful of days, you guys have been kind of literally like driving around, hiking around, and physically looking around at what that is. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so for the storm surge, looking at the observing sensors, the Upper Harbor and the Pago Bay tide gauge, nothing substantial. And so we're seeing 1 to 2 feet of a positive water anomaly. So the ocean water was about 1 or 2 feet higher than normal. But as we went around the island, looking at the beaches, the coastal areas, we're looking at the debris lines, see how high the water ran up. And so those debris lines, that is a product of not only the water rise.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you for a second. So let me make sure I understand this right. So when I go hiking, and I'm near a river, whatever, and I see some, what's that? What is that in English? Pandanus? Yeah, that's English. Pandanus leaves kind of bent over a tree trunk, and it's like 5 feet above from where the river is. I'm like, okay, and I tell people, you guys see that? This is how high the river is flooded to.
Yep.
And so when you say debris, you're just having, it could be anything.
So we're looking at bamboo, we're looking at trash, bottles, cans.
And so that tells you how high the water pushed it in, brought it in. Yes. Okay, debris line, got it.
So even on a normal day, if you go to Tumon or any other beach at low tide, you're going to see some small shells, maybe some leaves and stuff that it was pushed up at the most recent high tide, a little bit higher on the dry sand. So that's just one of the basic debris lines. After Typhoon Mawar passed, there's a lot thicker debris lines with bamboo, small trees and stuff pushed up on shore, sometimes 10, 20, 30 yards on shore. Paseo at the boat basin, rocks all up in the park. You can see where the crashing waves and the water currents just pushed all these large rocks and boulders into the grass. So we're looking at this, trying to see the maximum extent, both in horizontal and vertical. And there's some areas, especially behind the Onward Beach Resort, near a Lupang area, kind of in the corner of the bay. There is some evidence that the water pushed 9 to 12 feet above what the water level was at the time that we were observing and just assessing things.
So that's all right, 9, 12 feet inland or 9, 12 feet like
vertical
depth? Oh, wow.
So 9 to 12 feet vertical. And so that is.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. So inside the reef, the water traveled that far across the reef, and when it hit the beach, it was 9, 12 feet high.
Yeah,
that is insanity.
So this is not just like a tsunami or the typical storm surge where the whole water level comes up higher, but this is a product of both the the water level increase with the typhoon, but also the wind stress. As the typhoon approaches, the winds push the water ahead of the storm. So you're piling up the water higher, but then also the swell. So large swells break on the edge of the reef. That water gets higher on the reef. It has to escape to the ocean somehow. That's where you get the rip currents cutting through the small channels and the deeper channels on the reef's edge. But the water does pile up and you get that inundation. And then you got the wind effects. The wind, when those winds shifted around to the west, that's when it pushed all that water. And between what used to be the Sheraton Hotel, was it Riga now?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Between that cliff and the Lupat Island, that tends to be a very strong discharge of water from Agana Bay. But when the 100-mile-per-hour winds were pushing onto the shore out of the west, now that water can't escape. So it's just piling up. You got that wind and wave action piling up. So that's how the debris got pushed up. So we're seeing kind of in the central northern part some evidence for water was washing up about 9 to 12 feet up. Not so much down in the south where the winds were weaker, but the coastal shape does play a major role in that. Do you have a narrow inlet like Inarajan Bay? Telefofo Bay is kind of long and narrow. It's a little bit wider at the mouth, but Inarajan is just kind of more of a slender bay, so we didn't see so much run up in that area. Pago Bay would be more substantial because it's a very wide mouth and it just funnels right in. But then there's also the consideration of rainwater flooding. So if the oceanic water levels are higher, those floodwaters are coming out of the mountains off the island, and it just can't escape to the island because the overall water is higher. So those floodwaters just kind of sit and stagnate on the land.
That's bizarre to think about. You have like wind preventing water from moving.
Yeah.
So it's like the Earth's water bending or air bending. Like, I don't know if you guys watch that.
But you see that sometimes on some of the waterfalls. I know Upper Sigua Falls. If you get out there on the windy trade wind day, you get a little bit of a weak flow coming over the top of the waterfall. The wind's going to blow, and that water doesn't really keep falling. It's actually just blowing up, splattering up in the air. And so I just say it's a water rise. But then when the wind stops, then it just starts trickling down.
That took me a second.
It's a water up.
It's not a waterfall. It's a water rise. So, all right. So we talked about like the inundation part of the question. The other part of the question was wind speeds over parts of the island. So you don't have. Do you have instruments everywhere, or can you kind of have a best guess based on the kind of damage you see?
Well, yes, and so we're using some of the personal weather stations that people have posted on different web pages. We just got a automated weather observing system installed down in Inarajan with the Department of Agriculture, the fire weather concerns down in Dandan. So that one was reporting sustained winds up to 43 knots, so that's tropical storm force. And then we did get a peak wind gust of 88 knots. So again, this did not report during the peak of the storm. We did not get the data. But otherwise, Anderson, we used their system quite heavily, but they were also not reporting at the heaviest of the storm. They had turned off the power just in case with power issues and water intrusion. Concerns. But we did look at we do have some other sensors that we have with the Weather Service put up around the island. In Opera Harbor, we saw sustained winds up to 54 knots, so that's around 65 miles per hour until it stopped reporting. And then also here at the airport, the automated system, 62 knots, so about 71 miles per hour, gusting up to a near 105 miles per hour. So again, that's approaching Category 2 force gust. But the categories of a typhoon are based on the sustained winds. And so only here at the weather office did we measure sustained typhoon force winds up to 79 knots. And so typhoon force is 64 knots or 74 miles per hour. And we got up to 79 knots. So around 90, 91 miles per hour before our anemometer failed.
So there's a I hate to say it, or no, I don't. It's part of life, but there's an emotional component to this because the island is suffering right now.
Yeah.
You know, like a friend messaged me. He's like, "Oh my god, dude, I just like washed my hair finally like a few days ago." And I'm like, "Dude, I know the feeling."
Same boat.
And so a lot of people might not be happy to hear these things. You know, it's like you're telling me like the numbers aren't reflecting like how bad I'm feeling, and I will go ahead and tell you, listeners and viewers, yes, like you know, you can only record with a physical thing that's there to do the recording, right? And so if the only things that's working was here, and the worst if it got it north of here, then yeah, so you know, it doesn't have to water down like how you're feeling or how you're suffering with this whole thing. You know, your experience is still just as valid, even if an instrument, even if a device measured it somewhere further away, you know.
And
it's
that's a lot of the reason why we're doing the storm assessment, looking at the damage, the debris out there, because with such a lack of data points out here, we're not going to see the big picture. And so the forensics of the damage, the foliage, the jungle, the forensics
Weather
of what
forensics.
happened. We're doing that investigation. And so this is like crime scene investigation, but it's weather.
Yeah, your predecessor, if that's fair to say, Chip Guard, I recall him giving a talk somewhere. He said, "Well, I'm seeing these kinds of trees fall in this area, and this happens around this wind speed." Is that still a thing?
That's what we were
still a
doing
thing.
just the past 5 days, going around the island. We did a tour around all of Guam. We're looking at vegetation, the trees. How did the trees fall? Were they uprooted? Were they snapped mid-trunk? Were the branches snapped? Were they defoliated? Different trees.
Defoliated, just all the leaves.
The leaves taken off. Different trees react different ways. Some of the pine trees, the Australian pines, I believe it is, those are quite
that's
resilient.
That's Chamorro or ironwood in English.
Yeah. So
That's the Palawan.
those are extremely resilient to winds until a certain point. And then they have this explosive cracking and when they just finally shatter. So that says something to the wind speeds. But a lot of the road signs, how about the highway signs, the stop signs? How many have you seen that are down? Now, what's notable about that is some of them broke at where they're screwed in, bolted down to the sidewalk, or did it take that metal and just completely bend it? And there's one up in Retidian, before you start the big descent, that speed limit sign is doing the limbo. It is perfectly horizontal, 3 to 4 inches above the grass. It is still fully attached, but it's got a perfect right angle bend.
Do you think it bends like to that degree instantly, or is it like kind of slowly bending with the sustain and gusts?
That's a good question.
When I asked Chip Guard the same question, and so one of the other forecasters on the assessment team did as well. If you had 100 mile per hour winds, will it eventually result in a gradual bending of the sign? Or does it take a much stronger wind speed to finally do that? Because, and the way Chip Guard explained it is certain impacts only occur when you get a certain intensity. So it's not if you had 12 hours of tropical storm conditions, that it would actually look like a Category 1 typhoon condition. But at a Category 1 condition, certain things will be impacted and show signs of breaking, failure, bending, or whatever. So that's one of my questions for him is, at what point, at what category winds would you expect to see that type of sign just bend that pole, not even snap it, just bent it? And there's one right at the intersection of Marine Drive and Route 8, right down Yamaha Auto Spot before Chamorro Village area. There's another sign just like that. It's not perfectly bent flat, but it was pretty well bent.
Oh, is it the entrance to the Axe Murderer parking lot?
Yeah, right across the street.
Okay, okay.
Yep, right in that area. And but so that says a lot to the wind speeds. And so
what is the wind speed? Sorry, give me a number. I'm dying to know.
I am actually cross-referencing all that right now. So
he's showing me a clipboard right now.
Yes, we got a clipboard, and it breaks down all the storm categories and then what type of damages. So let's just say Typhoon Category 4, very strong typhoon. Potential damage: some reinforced hollow spun concrete, many reinforced wooden power poles are blown down. We didn't see many wooden power poles blown down because there's not many. Fortunately, in recent decades, most of them have been converted to concrete. And I would say the concrete power poles fared quite well. There may be a couple of them that are tilted, just some of the forcing from the power lines. There were a couple of wooden poles that were snapped and blown down.
So like snapped mid-length above the ground,
Yep.
or is it like
Yeah.
kind of pulling out of the ground?
And there's actually up
both?
on the airport road, Sunset Boulevard, I think it is, right along the cliff. There was a wooden pole that the wires are still attached to the T section at the top, but the rest of the pole is broken.
I'm gonna go
down.
look for this.
So now there was a crew out there this morning and yesterday, so it might be
gone.
getting rectified very soon. But some of the other things, numerous secondary and a few primary power lines have been down. We've seen lots of secondary lines. Some primary lines, especially around the north end of Guam from Matidian to the Anderson main gate.
If you go through Estumbo, it's a mess.
So that was not very, did not see any of that in the south. Primary lines, some secondary lines, but by far and large, central North Guam got it much worse. Extensive damage to non-concrete roofs. Estumbo drive-through, yeah, there is some major damage to the tin and wooden roofs. Complete failure of many roof structures. I am holding out on how to assess the word many. Now, certainly there was a lot of roof failures, but quantifying the word many, I'd want to talk with Chip more about that. Window frames and doors, especially unprotected, non-reinforced ones. So there were some cases of that. Many well-built wooden and metal structures severely damaged. Yeah, there was some of that.
I like that qualification there, like maybe well-built, because, there's going to be a difference between what a professional contractor would produce
Yeah.
and what me, and my Zoris up on the roof would produce.
Yeah. Weekly reinforced cinder block walls are blown down. So cinder block walls without reinforcement.
Does that mean just like hollow blocks that stay hollow? Or?
That would be my interpretation.
Okay.
And of course, I would run that against Chip as well. Complete disintegration of mobile homes and other structures of lighter materials. We don't really have mobile homes out here, but we do have some of those
I'm
truck
calling
containers.
it a trailer park.
Yeah.
The one in Tingisan.
Yeah.
By the rocks in Hilan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm calling that a trailer park. Have you guys been there yet?
Not been
Not
there.
yet? Okay,
but
no
we
worries.
have
We
a
can
lot
move
of we have a lot of trailer parks back home in North Carolina and the southeast states, and those are always prone to tornadoes.
Yeah.
They don't stand a chance against tornadoes, or even Category 1 or 2 hurricanes. This is the last place you want to be. So, fortunately, we have much hardened structures over here for a reason, and typhoons and earthquakes, those are the reasons.
All right, so let's pause. We'll come back to that. But I want to. You just said the word tornado, so it's a perfect segue to this video I made right before the typhoon hit. Hoffaday, Guam. You know how we watch like the news or the movies in the States and we see tornadoes and that freaks us out? Well, we're about to get the first direct hit of a typhoon on Guam, literally in decades. And the sustained wind speeds are actually in the same range as a significant tornado, except it's a significant tornado that lasts for hours. And some of the gusts we're going to be seeing are up in the next category, which is a severe tornado. So we're dealing with tornado wind speeds that last for hours. So stay inside, stay safe, stay smart. If you still have internet, you can watch a live feed from the GCIC building overlooking Marine Drive and a little bit of Taki Island. If you lose internet or you don't have a radio, you can call for weather updates. You can call 211. I've been calling it a few times and it's usually busy, but if you try periodically, you'll eventually get through. Is that a fair description that I said? Is that a reasonable?
Yeah, that is reasonable, and I think it puts it in perspective when you see the news coverage of these EF 2 or 3, 4 tornadoes in the Midwest or the Southeast states, as compared to a typhoon.
Okay.
It's a tornado of a much larger scale, and I remember I lived in Norman, Oklahoma for about 5 weeks before I came to Guam, and I went through 3 different tornado outbreaks, and I was at the time posturing the likelihood of building a house over in Oklahoma City area. And my premise was, if I end up staying there, I want it to be a concrete house like it is in Guam, because I don't want to go into every spring and think, is this a spring that I lose everything I work for? Because most houses over there are wood and brick or vinyl. and I don't want to stand that chance. And I told folks, some of my friends that live there, I said, I don't know how y'all can stand to live like this every year thinking, oh, well, this might be the year I lose everything. But on the flip side, they said they would rather live there with tornadoes than ever do with hurricanes, because hurricanes spook them to no end because it's so much bigger, so much larger.
And longer.
But I was like, you know what? You can see a typhoon or a hurricane days in advance, and you can take relative precautions, especially with a concrete house. But the tornado outbreak, it's up to the moment whether it's going to be your house or your neighbors or the next block. So it really depends on what you're used to. But typhoons are a way of life. We take the threat seriously. We prepare and we plan and communicate it.
That's part of why I made the video I did, because those of us who are old enough to remember typhoons, we might think that's like, it's whatever, it's normal, we used to deal with this. But it's been 20 plus years since we've seen a real typhoon with a direct hit. And so some of us might not be taking that seriously. There's a lot of people in their 20s now who maybe have an apartment or whatever, or maybe even early 30s, and they don't remember any typhoons. So I'm like, guys, whatever, we've always been dealing with this as a community, but we've never dealt with a typhoon. And as I'm Chamorro, born and raised here, and when I see tornadoes in movies and stuff, that is terrifying to me. So I thought I could make that kind of connection and hopefully help people take it seriously if they weren't.
I think that was a good connection, because I think we did a Facebook Live broadcast. I think it was 8 o'clock Thursday morning, right after the worst of it had ended and things were starting to ease up. And Brandon was working the camera while I was talking, and I said, looking out our back window, what used to be jungle now looks like toothpicks. And I said, it looks like a scene from the movie Twister. It was all thrash. What used to be lush green jungle outside our back door of the forecast office is now just bare wood, and it's all cracked, tumbled, tossed around. You can see Route 8 from our back window, which is something I've heard about from the last typhoon in 2002, but I've never seen it in 13 years. But we can literally see across the jungle now. You can see Ladera Tower from our back door. You can see Route 8. You can see Subway on Route 8. It's fascinating.
This is a normal thing, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
After so growing up, you can tell it was kind of one of our kind of forensics, our typhoon forensics as locals. I grew up in Chalampago, and when I can see my godbrother's house, hey Russ, and the Maritita family up in Santa Cruz, when we can see their house directly from our house, it's like, all right, this was a real one.
Yeah, this is a storm, and that's how it is up in Estumba. I went up to the roof of my house, 3 stories up, and climbed a ladder to get up there just to see if I had any phone signal. I had a little bit of a bar, but what used to be lush jungle up there in NCS Estumba area looks like a pure urban environment, because all you see are buildings, houses.
Yep. Speaking of lush jungle, or formerly lush jungle, I got a question from @KinDoKin. Why did this storm upturn so many trees that have survived stronger storms in the past? And I'll weigh in on this after you guys, because I think I have a different perspective.
And I think this comes for several reasons, and we were communicating this also in the Federated States of Micronesia when this thing was really taking shape in Chuk State. You've had a lot of trees that have been able to grow unchecked for a number of years. I mean, we lost a lot of trees. Think back to the Hilton entrance, where you had these beautiful trees out there, where they had those icicle Christmas lights every year. Driving up to the Hilton, they were all downed during Dolphin. But a lot of trees survived because they've been growing unchecked without any kind of typhoon hits. So you had a lot of lush growth. You had a lot of leaves, foliage, more branches. And for 20 years, there's not been a significant typhoon strike. And so all these were able to grow unchecked. But then we also had the intense rainfall. So you had a lot of rainfall, you had a lot of saturated soils, and then the prolonged time frame of strong winds. And so that really just toppled anything that was remotely weakened. We lost all the trees in our property that were not coconut trees. Everything else, mango, gone. Everything's gone.
Cool. Brand, do you have something you wanted to say?
No, I think that pretty much nails it.
Right.
If we don't get typhoons fairly regularly, those trees do grow nice, full, and lush. And then when you get a lot of saturating rains, that weakens the soil, and the trees are much easier to knock over.
Okay, so I have two things. One about a particular native tree, and some non-native trees. So we have a native tree called Dawak. I have no idea what that is in English, sorry, but that's like the ones in Agania, across Chamorro Village and in front of Mosas, right? And so
Oh yeah.
in the seafaring community, in the canoe community, we know that that particular tree is used for parts of canoes, or maybe even parts of the hull, or the hull itself. And I was wondering, like, how is that possible? They branch so close to the ground, it's hard to get a straight length out of it. When you go to Micronesia, other parts of Micronesia, you can see this nice, straight, pronounced trunk that you could have, viable pieces of wood from. And so I asked a very knowledgeable guy with a lot of opinions that are fun, Joe Takaro. And he says, because of typhoons, they're not getting so much activity in central or eastern Micronesia, but when they come over to here, they sustain some damage, and they're literally like hardened, like someone who has a hard childhood or whatever, like they come up hard. So they survive typhoons, and that makes them more resilient. They turn out to branch early. And so that's an observation that I've made, and an explanation that was made to me. And then also, I don't know how's your tree ID? Can you identify African tulips and the flame trees that we like? So anyway, we have these non-native trees, right?
Yeah, I can tell you a Christmas tree.
And they produce garbage wood. So I'm telling you guys, listeners and viewers, so like Hoover Park, and then also in other parts of PD on the way to was that the naval station. And then you have these African tulips. I think both of those are from Madagascar, if I'm not mistaken. Some of them you just see like the tree just literally snap in half.
Yeah.
Like I have a picture of me standing on one at UOG. The president of UOG was driving by. He took a picture of me while I was standing on it. It's kind of funny. And so like it literally just snapped in half. Now, admittedly, there's some rot on the inside of that particular one, but we saw this in, what was it, Dolphin, a handful of years ago. You're seeing some of these trees just literally snap in half because they produce such weak wood. So, who was it? What was your name? Kin Do Kin. That if that's what you're seeing, I don't remember seeing that much African tulips before in my childhood, if any. And so if you're seeing trees snapped in half, my observation has been a lot more of the trees that are snapped in half are non-native, and the trees that are just held together and just kind of fell over and the roots are sticking out, those tend to be more of the native trees. That's been my personal observation, native versus non-native trees.
And definitely we want the stronger trees, the stronger woods for Lincoln logs.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about that before. No, it's wonderful work you guys are doing. So I'd like to, that'd be maybe a nice little way to end it. So you also mentioned this storm was brewing in Chuuk, was it?
Yes.
Was anybody else affected in Micronesia? How's Rhoda? How's Lutza? I have not seen or heard really much of anything about Lutza.
And definitely, I'll let you go to Lutza next, but we were watching this develop in Micronesia for a while.
Whereabouts?
So this was right in far eastern Yap State and western Chuuk State. And so we started issuing formal information around Thursday, May 18th on this Invest area, 97W, that eventually became O2W Mawar. And so this is causing problems in Micronesia for a number of days. And so this became a Guam event that Friday afternoon and then hitting us Wednesday. But we were working this storm through its development the whole week prior. So this is a very long duration event for us at the Weather Service, because we do have forecasting and warning responsibility for all of Micronesia. And so it sat on top of them, not so much as a strong tropical system with the destructive winds, but it was hazardous sea and surf conditions, gusty winds, but also torrential rainfall that can cause a lot of problems in Weno Chuuk with the high islands, the mountains, the steep slopes. It can generate mudslides, especially if you have a lot of prolonged rainfall, and that's what we were concerned about. And
Weno is the main island of Chuuk.
Yes, in Chuuk Lagoon. And so we were watching this for several days, but then also starting to gear up for action in the Mariana Islands. And so we went from a Micronesia event to a Mariana Island event. And so this is just a very long duration event for us, spanning nearly 2 weeks plus, because now we're in the post-storm phase, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and it's been about a 3-week ordeal. So all of our plans, our projects, our meetings and schedules for 3 weeks essentially been put on hold, and we've had to make all kinds of postponements for major events because of this one storm. But we're trying to get some damage reports, some impacts from Micronesia, and it's been mainly agricultural. We've not seen or heard of any kind of loss of life or casualties, which is great. That's what we want to hear. But as far as structural damage, it's just been all agricultural impacts with saltwater intrusion. But
banana trees,
but
the
for
papaya.
Brandon, for Luta,
Yeah, out of the Northern Islands, haven't got many reports. Have really been scouring media reports, social media, news coverage, and it does look fairly convincing that Category 1 typhoon conditions were seen on Luta, tropical storm conditions on Tinian and Saipan. So not a lot of surprise, just more of a foliage. There were certainly some structural issues with the wooden and tin structures, the roofing, but not nearly as significant as here on Guam. But there were some downed lines across the Northern Islands. Nothing significant, and it seemed like power was quickly restored, and roads were fairly quickly opened up from the few down trees.
Okay, that's a relief.
So that's
they need
good
a break.
to hear.
They've been getting hit, as you guys know.
Yeah.
So I guess it's our turn.
They've had a very busy 2015, 2017, 2018.
19.
Yeah, and so Guam's drought of tropical cyclone direct hits is come to an end.
So you were talking about this being a 3-week ordeal. So what is your operations like normally here, and then how does that change and your staffing change during this kind of periods?
Yeah, we are a 24/7 facility, so we always have 2 forecasters on duty night and day, forecasting for all of Micronesia, Guam, and the CNMI. But when it comes to storm threats, we start beefing up our staff numbers because we have more products, more text bulletins, more information to be pushing out, to gather, to assess, to analyze, to push out. And then we also have the phone calls, the engagement, the public engagement with media, Homeland Security, and other government partners. So when this thing was starting to materialize, we went into a full tropical cyclone operational mode by, I think it was Friday. We started beefing up our staff.
We started supplementing.
We started communicating things formally with Homeland Security and the government. That was on Friday afternoon, because we wanted to hit this hard, because we didn't know if we were going to be dealing with a Monday storm or a Tuesday storm. We were looking at a time frame similar to Typhoon Mawar in 2018.
That was so frustrating. It's like, all right, I'm preparing for like a Monday night hit, and then Monday's kind of like, when is this thing gonna hit? Like, come on, let's get
getting
over it.
Kicked down a little bit more. And so I called Homeland Security on Friday, and I said, depending on how this thing evolves in the next couple hours, we may want to formalize some communication. So that's when we had our first heavy weather brief, was on Friday afternoon. And I said, it's still very early, time is on our side, but because of these metrics we're looking at, we have a high potential threat from a tropical cyclone, and I want to get this communicated before the weekend starts, because people need to use this weekend to prepare. And I remember I talked to Tracy at GPA that Friday afternoon, and I said, you know what? I said, it's a beautiful weekend for tree trimming. And she said, I
heard that somewhere.
Yeah, she said, what are you trying to tell me? I said, it's a beautiful weekend to get everybody out there trimming trees. And so the weekend was beautiful. And I think a lot of people did take heed of the information. Come Saturday, we formalized and stepped things up with Homeland Security with the heavy weather briefs as this thing was starting to materialize, and also held course toward Guam. But we still had that potential for the wiggle and avoid us altogether.
And there was a lot of wiggle.
But we were looking at that high likelihood that Guam could also be looking at direct hit, and we had to take that seriously to communicate it and make sure people were prepared for the possibility of a hit. And so it was very well communicated. We had a lot of events warning, and as this thing was moving so slowly, time was on our side, which was great, because it kept moving down from a Tuesday night event to Wednesday midday to a Wednesday afternoon, then evening. Time was on our side, and as things came to pass, it was well warranted. We needed every moment to prepare, and probably more was needed.
Well, the other thing about it is we did not want to go into the weekend, great weather weekend, and then people come back into the news cycle, come into work on Mondays, and then be surprised with this big threat so close by. It's like Friday, no need to prepare yet, but be aware things could significantly change early in the week, and so Landon mentioned the good thing about the slower track as we got into Tuesday and Wednesday, more time to prepare, but also it had the negative. The negative side effects that this storm had more time to intensify. And so that Category 2, Category 3 passage in the earlier forecast became a Category 4, Category 5 threat because it had all that much more time to intensify to our southeast.
And then we just got lucky with the timing of the eye wall reconstruction.
Yeah, the eye replacement cycle. And so it's I hope people were able to get enough word. I know we'd had a lot of communications out of this office with emergency managers, and this is the first one in quite a while. It's a wake up for a lot of people, especially the younger generation who have not had a direct experience. And so this is where the Manamco, the older generation, is so important because they have been through some true monsters of typhoons, the 60s, the 70s, the 90s. And so that's where their storytelling, their accounts of their experiences has played out. And here we are, many people still waiting on power or water or both. And it's like, it's nothing new. We got hit in 2002. We experienced the 90s. You just learned to get by.
Yeah, I remember it being like, I feel like, do we have a lot more information than we used to 20, 30 years ago?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I remember growing up, like, hearing like there might be a typhoon, let's just board up right now.
Yeah.
So I remember doing that sometimes multiple times a year. And now there's so much information, we're a little spoiled. Like, not
See,
yet.
there's so much information, but there's also misinformation from apps, weather apps on the phone. People have access to all kinds of weather information on web pages and different apps.
Is that fair? Is that fair? Is it misinformation or is it layperson misinterpretation?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Because it gives you enough information to get you in trouble because you don't know exactly how to interpret it, what exactly it means. And so I tell people all the time, the meteorologists are here 24/7 to look at exactly that information, but we decipher the gibberish to put out the best available forecast. We get through the technical details to give you the best available forecast.
So on that note, got one last question from Mike Orr here. I got other questions, but one more from him. Why did the GFS model do so well, and why didn't we trust it more? What is GFS first? I'm asking.
So the GFS, that is one of the U.S. National Weather Service models that we produce. And there's several other models that we use pretty heavily, one being the European model. And so a lot of people will call us or send us a message on Facebook showing us something. Hey, Windy shows this. Which Windy is being one of those apps that shows weather models. And so somebody may often be pointing out something on the 10th day, 240 hours out into the future.
Isn't that basically useless?
It's, models are getting better.
Something to watch.
Is it almost basically useless?
We take it into consideration.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beyond 7 days out, something to watch.
Okay.
Don't take action on. Something to take note of. But from the forecaster perspective, we see these things, we see these trends, and so the GFS was indicating it like 15 days out. It showed a developing tropical cyclone. Certainly, you would not want to append any specific intensity to it, but you see this well-developed circulation. Initially, each run 6 hours after each other, it varied from the typhoon or the tropical cyclone moving somewhere near Yap, or the next run 6 hours later pushes it east of the Marianas, or another run later sends it up toward Wake Island. There's a lot of spread. What I would take as a forecaster is, okay, this model is picking up on some type of circulation developing that's highly uncertain where it's going to go, when it's going to do it, but it is picking up on this. Everything is right for a circulation to develop with a potential tropical cyclone. Now, as we get closer, day 13 becomes 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Other models start joining in, showing the same scenario, maybe different intensity, And so in this case, the GFS, and in most cases, the GFS tends to really intensify circulations, sometimes overly so, too much so. We try to look for signals in the model data that kind of clue us in on that. But we really look for other computer models to show a similar scenario. Once we have multiple models showing a similar scenario on a similar timeline, then we have much higher forecaster confidence. And nowadays, we could see that type of a consensus among the models within 5 to 7 days. So that's still pretty good compared to models 3 years ago, 5, 7, 10 years ago, substantially better. And so I think about 9 days out before this system developed, it started zeroing in on a passage between Yap and Guam, and then it gradually started getting closer to Guam. And then when it was warned on as the tropical depression by Joint Typhoon Warning Center, the first 9 bulletins issued every 6 hours. So that's more than about 2.5 days of forecast tracks, very consistent, passing between Guam and Rota. And then number 10 dropped just south of Guam. It eventually nudged back up, but remarkable consistency. And the GFS, I would have to say the GFS pretty well nailed it. The European model did come in pretty close. It tended to stay a little bit to the left of the GFS, just the way that the models kind of process the data and then project into the future. But overall, the European was much weaker in intensity, and the GFS just had it. And from a forecaster standpoint, we're seeing this depression form. What down in Chuk and Yap states, what could have hindered the development? Everything was there. You had widespread warm water, surface waters. That warm water was deep, a couple 100 feet deep. There's a plentiful supply of warm water. You had favorable winds, low-level winds, upper-level winds that were just allowing the clouds to spread out at the top of the atmosphere. That's what you need to see a significant tropical cyclone develop. And so basically, what is out there that could hinder its intensification? And there was nothing.
How do you know the water was warm, like a couple 100 feet deep?
We've satellite data.
Okay.
Satellite data, you can get a good look at the skin temperature of the ocean surface. And so
How deep is skin?
right at the very top.
Okay.
And then there's other data that will, buoy data, that will go down several 100 feet. We're looking at the thermocline. And then model data, we'll take that buoy data and then put it all together. That's some of the ways we track for the ENSO phase change. We're seeing those trends all across the Pacific equatorial regions. And so that's cluing us into a changing switch from La Nina to El Nino.
Cool. All right. Just going to take a different track here. I had a couple people ask this question. So why did you guys only talk on Facebook? And I think I know the answer, but let's hear from you guys.
Yeah, Facebook, that's been an experimental phase of the National Weather Service agency-wide as we
Agency-wide, so not just this office, around the
nationally.
country. Okay.
And so that's been an experimental process for a number of years. We've started our Facebook page in 2013. We've been building that up. We were finally approved to start doing Facebook Live in experimental capacity to supplement our communications. I think that was in 2019 or 2020. I think we kind of broke ahead of that allowance in a TC event. I think it was WUTIP in 2019.
TC, tropical
cyclone.
Okay.
And so we went ahead and, even though we weren't authorized or approved to use it, we went ahead and used it because there was that need to communicate to people. And so I did a social science communications research back in 2018 on Guam. How do people on Guam get their weather information, and can that process be improved? And the results were overwhelmingly, yes, the communications for weather can be improved. Out of 800 surveys completed, 91% said yes. And when asked how, people wanted more information, more social media, more information alerts. And looking at the means of communications, Facebook was the leading social media platform by a long shot compared to others. And this was back in 2018. But even more so across Micronesia, Facebook is the primary social media platform, and I've spoke with people across Micronesia regarding that. So our audience here overwhelmingly used Facebook versus other means. Instagram was a distant second, and then Twitter was a farther third. And those metrics can vary significantly from state or city, especially in the States. But we have that means where we're also on Twitter. We started that in 2020, but we have a much smaller following on Twitter. But Facebook is it. So we're using that. We're developing the Facebook Live broadcast because people are getting that. They can share it. But we also want to expand upon what we were doing. We did 14 Facebook Live broadcasts, which is the most we've done for any single event in our office history. But these weren't little 5-minute videos, which is what we set out to do. We followed the crowd and the dynamics of the viewers. Some of our broadcasts were upwards of, I think, 30 minutes long because we wanted to engage the audience, get question and answer. If people had questions or concerns, fears or worries, they could type it in. We could answer it live on the broadcast. And that was a huge advantage to our captivating people, but also communicating with them things that concern them. And we're talking about fear and stress and worry and anxiety. And we wanted to make sure we could allay some of those worries and fears the best we can. We may not always have the best information or the information they want, but we can give them information that's credible and reliable that people can take and plan on it. And so we may not always have good news, but it's stuff that they can work with. And so go ahead.
So the short answer is you wanted to improve. You actually did a survey. That was the most bang for your buck, and it's what your organization would allow, your agency would allow.
And we would like to expand upon this and broadcast in other means and methods, but of course we're very limited on capacity and bodies in the building.
You're not radio DJs, right?
And so we're not radio DJs. And so that's where the local broadcast media are so important because they're the voice.
Do they have people come here during the
we did open up to that.
Or they could always just kind of repeat what you say.
Yeah, and they did that. We had 2 media outlets here during Typhoon Mawar in 2018. That worked very well, having Facebook Live broadcasts and Q&A on site and live. I did invite local media here for that, but we didn't have anybody stay with us during this storm. But it got to the point that we were talking very frequently on camera, on video, but they started sharing our Facebook Live broadcast and then would follow up with us on the phone or by email or WhatsApp. And that worked very well because what we were covering on Facebook Live, I think, met a lot of needs of the people, showing what was happening, showing where things are, and discussing the storm and evolution and how things were setting up. And so I think that really played out, not just locally, but apparently nationally and internationally. We had more global news coverage of this typhoon than any in our 13 years here. It was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, and just to make that real personal, I'm going to share an anecdote of yours, actually. You posted on Facebook or Facebook Friends, right? A woman met you by chance. Was it at the mall?
Yeah,
and like gave you a big hug and was like, was she tearing or something?
Yeah, she was just all smiles and she was starting to tear up toward the end of the conversation, and it really struck me because I'm trying to survive. I'm hunting and gathering for anything I can drink and water and supplies.
And you're literally you're hungry and thirsty.
Yeah, okay. And so she came up to me. She's like, "You're one of the twins, right? You're the weather guy." And I said, "Yeah, that's me." She's like, "Oh my gosh, this is the answer to my prayers. I was praying that God would just let me come across you somewhere just so I could say thank you." And she said, "This is the answer to my prayers." And so she came up and hugged me, and she was just telling me that what we were doing saved lives, and that our calmness, our cool-headed presentations and stuff, that we're not stressed or anxious, really eased her fears and stress ahead of the storm and during the storm. And that it was such a difference because of what we were saying, communicating, and showing. It helps so many people, but also being forward-leaning and preparing people way ahead of this thing save lives. And so she was very thankful for that, and she went on to elaborate some more, but it was just a kind of emotional thing because we're still shell-shocked from working 36 plus hours and minimal sleep, if any at all. I've had 2 days off since May 1st right now. It's June 2nd. I've had 2 days off since May 1st. And it's been some mad hours, and we're still going. But to hear the feedback from the community and knowing that what we did as our normal part of our job to protect life and property resonated with the public and the community, and that it was well received, I think that's really motivating and encouraging because yeah, we need that. It's good to hear that kind of feedback.
I know the feeling. Not that the things I produce save lives or anything, I guess except that one time I did save somebody's life, but that was very directly.
Yeah.
But anyway, so like I was at or when I'm around in public and someone just says, "Hey, you're the Guam guy," or "Hey, thanks for what you do," or whatever, it's so motivating.
It is.
It's very, it's like, okay, I am reaching some people, and I am doing what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing,
Yeah.
and so on. So yeah, I totally feel you there. I haven't had anyone cry,
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah, it gets tedious working shift work and working nights and stuff. But
hours
And a
are long.
24-hour operation.
Yeah.
You guys probably rotate like the worst shifts,
Yeah.
let's say.
yeah, but
Okay.
it's like before this event and immediately after, it's like I can't go anywhere in public without somebody stopping me and saying thank you or wanting to get a photo. And I'm sure Brandon probably gets that too. But
They think he's you.
it's it's really touching because what we do, whether you're on camera or behind the scenes here in the weather office, and for the most part, the weather service is always behind the scenes. We're not a public figure agency. We're people behind a computer screen putting out text bulletins. What we do touches lives,
Yeah.
and that's what we're here for.
Speaking of behind the scenes, shout out to Brandon. Oh man, Buckent?
Buchan.
Brandon
Buchan, yes.
Yeah, he's also a friend of mine who I was hitting up occasionally. I try not to abuse my relationships or friendships
Well,
with people.
Brandon's one of our
Yeah.
top guys because it's all in the name. It's an Andon.
Okay. So I have a friend here, and he's been, suffering. He's not from here, so he's feeling the effects of no power or water a little hard. And so I think he just took a trip to Japan. And I don't think his brain is working properly with the heat, because where's the typhoon at right now?
I think he went to intercept it or something.
he missed. I think he missed the typhoon. He's like, come back.
Yeah, they're going to be in for a lot of showers and thunderstorms and gusty winds.
Yeah.
It's a tropical storm now, which is good for them, but it's going to be a major rain event, probably flash flooding and mudslides in
Yeah.
Japan.
Cloudy and
Philippines
rain.
going to be okay in Taiwan, or
Where is he exactly?
he's going to Japan. Oh, Philippines and Taiwan, are they?
They're all right.
all right.
They're much quieter. The Typhoon Mawar stayed to the east of them. It just started curving north as it neared Taiwan, but it stayed offshore for both locations. And it looks like the latest track does have it skirting just south of Japan, but nonetheless, Japan's
Lot
going to
of
be in for a
rain.
lot of rain the next several days. So some major flood issues, possibly mudslides, will be the big concern.
So yeah, speaking, one more question from Russ Keller. How is the rest of the season looking for storm tracks? Is it? Can you say anything, or?
Let's just say that we were going to publicly release the typhoon outlook for the remainder of the year yesterday on June 1st, but that's been delayed because of the typhoon. So is that a bad omen for the year? It could be. We talked about the ENSO cycle and the shift to El Nino and how that typically gives us a much busier year for tropical cyclones in the region. It doesn't guarantee we're going to have a landfalling typhoon, but it does mean we have a much higher likelihood of tropical cyclones. And so we're looking at a much busier year than we've seen in 3 years. And we're going to be finalizing that typhoon seasonal outlook for 2023 for all of the Western North Pacific, and hopefully have that for public release ready on June 29th. That's what I'm leaning toward.
Okay, so check back later. That's basically the answer?
Yeah, that'll be the official release, but we are looking at a busier year. So whatever worked well with this storm, what did not work well with this storm, especially regarding preparedness,
Learn from it.
learn from it now, because we might have a long year ahead of us.
Cool. So we can start wrapping this up. So if there's anything that hasn't been said yet, please get that ready. Write it down if you want to. But speaking of being lessons learned, what would you like everyone to know? What haven't we said yet so far during this recording? What should everyone know going forward?
Tropical cyclones. We're in Typhoon Alley. We've been lucky for 21 years to not have a direct hit. Is it a fluke? Is it natural? I don't know. But we are in Typhoon Alley, so be ready. Always be ready. It's not just a season. It's not a time of year. Any time of year we could be hit. We are in the warm tropics, and we could have everything lined up just right. Be prepared. Learn from this event, and cash, water, non-perishable foods.
Gas up.
Gas up.
Before.
Gas up. Do your laundry before too.
Yeah, I gassed on Tuesday, and I only gassed for the first time yesterday, and there was no line. Like,
Yeah,
I had a perfect. I was pulling over in the tri intersection. I'm like, there's no line.
Yep.
And so I jumped right in.
Yeah,
they're only taking cash though, and luckily the next pump over was my friend Chris Gullick. I'm like, bro, do you have extra cash? And he did. So shout out Chris from Let's Dive Guam.
Yeah, my thing for people is as we're communicating more away from our text bulletins, we're not stopping our text bulletins, but we're adding to it with our Facebook Live broadcast, our social media coverage. If you're in doubt about anything, send us a message. Email us on Facebook, email our
Message you on Facebook or
our
email
office,
you,
call
or-
our office, but talk to us on Facebook because we're going to be broadcasting there. If you have any questions about what is a tropical cyclone, what are the wind speed categories, what are the triple threat of a tropical cyclone? That's wind, water, rain. Those are the big three ones. But yeah, as far as what I want people to know is if they have any questions, ask.
Okay.
Talk to the Weather Service. We are a service to the public. We are here
This
for
is why
you.
you exist.
This is why we exist. So follow us on Facebook. This is the best way to talk to a forecaster anytime around the clock. Send us a message at U.S. National Weather Service Guam Facebook page. And when we do have another threat and we do Facebook Live, type in your question because we're going to have forecasters standing by on the Facebook Live broadcast to answer you by text, or one of us, Brandon or myself, or a forecaster will answer the question live on camera. But we want people to be educated, aware, and to know everything coming up. We have so much jargon. We have
Yeah, I've been calling you out this whole time.
what is a tropical storm watch? What is a tropical storm watch?
That's
You don't know. Okay, there we go. So we need to explain that. And we try to hit that as hard as we can this last typhoon because there are subtle differences between a watch and a warning, tropical storm, typhoon, categories, hurricane, typhoon.
Is
We want to
something
make sure people
possible
know it.
or something expected?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
And so if you have a question, ask it because we want to respond to that as best as we can to make sure everyone is educated to all of these things that can affect your life.
And just a quick bit of live feedback here. So I had some trouble joining the live streams. So when I would like go to the to your actual page and go to videos, it wasn't popping up there. And so I had friends who had to like kind of invite me to watch it. So I don't know if it's possible to make it an event and then people could have the link. I know you're so and something like that, just so people could forward it around a little more easily. Like I had people tagging me in comments because I'm on WhatsApp. Hey, someone send me the link, and they're tagging me in comments and they're screenshotting it, and I can see all this, but it's just not taking me to there.
Okay, yeah, we'll look into that.
Just something, and I think Facebook is not sufficient, but anything more than that, I don't think it should be on you. I'm a little sad the media wasn't here, or hopefully they were reposting or rebroadcasting or repeating the information on radio. Growing up, that's all we had. It was literally just radio. Social media wasn't a thing. We had till lots of 2000. I don't know if you guys weren't here for that. That was our dial-up. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's also a really cool thing. So radio is not necessarily one-sided, like people can call in, but as long as the internet keeps up, shout out to GTA, by the way. As long as the internet keeps up, you can live comment and ask questions. So very, very cool.
And that was one of the other reasons we wanted to get started on Friday, because the media cycle goes down quite a bit on the weekends. And if we waited until Monday to get into the media, it would have been too late.
Panic.
But so we will definitely take some of those ideas and see how we can incorporate.
Cool. All right. Is there anything that you've wanted to say in this? I imagine this is the longest you've had to talk about this.
We have a longer one next week.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay.
2 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is there anything that hasn't been said yet that you wanted to say?
Stay up to date.
Okay.
Know where to get your information.
Yeah.
What are your reliable sources for information, for weather information?
And interpretation.
Yeah, that's right.
And dial 211. That's the NOAA Weather Radio phone line, 211. Or get a battery-powered NOAA Weather Radio, and you can get that at most any hardware store on the island, hopefully.
Okay.
But battery power is good power.
Okay, cool. Now, just to end on a personal note, you guys are a couple of world record holders, huh?
Oh yeah, we are.
So you make these Lincoln log constructions.
Yes.
And so that's something that's really cool, and it's always for some kind of charitable event or charity. Well, tell us about that.
Yeah, so we had our world record event back in June of 2022. That was our big one at the TheGuamGuy Shopping Center, and we built the world's largest and tallest toy timber structure, and it was a recreation of the Willis Tower in Chicago. And so that was a phenomenal event, partnered with Habitat for Humanity. We raised $20,000 for the charity. In December, the Micronesian Mall approached us for an event there. We built several towers. We did not have access to a lift, so we had to cap our buildings to about 12 feet in height. But we built 3 towers, and we partnered with Toys for Tots to collect toys for that nonprofit, that charity. Now we have another event coming up in September. This is going to be at the TheGuamGuy Shopping Center, and we hope to do a 9/11 themed event and partner with several first responders, charitable groups, as well as maybe a food drive. We're looking at different options for different events with this one in September, pending no typhoons.
Okay. Just putting this out there sometime in the future. And it's an open invitation. Anytime you want, I can bring my climbing gear and be a human wrecking ball. Okay, I'm not even joking.
That would be fun.
Just go on some balcony.
King Kong.
Just King Kong it, yeah. Or even maybe I could try to climb it with the gear on, and so someone else can be on the other end of the rope to catch me. We have equipment for this. It's called belaying, and
Yes.
belay my fall. So maybe we can put you guys in
That
gear and
would
have
be
you try to climb it too.
That would
if
be
you want.
fun.
That'd be really fun. So,
Gosh.
Okay. Final thoughts. Last chance. Good. Okay.
Good.
All right. So that was Landon and Brandon Aydlett from the National Weather Service here on Guam. I want to thank you guys so much for doing this recording with me, and especially for all your work before, during, and even up to now, and continuing on after this goes live with Typhoon Mawar and every other thing that comes our way that gets our attention, and even the things that don't come our way and affect our Micronesian siblings in the region. Okay, so that was another episode of the TheGuamGuy Show. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.